My grandmother forced my mother to hand me over on my 5th birthday, then used fake letters to make me believe she'd abandoned me. When I finally opened up about the truth, Grandma laughed and said, "Mothers who break tradition don't deserve daughters." I stayed silent. That was 3 years ago. This morning, she was dragged out of court, screaming my name. What was your most horrifying family tradition? My grandmother expected every woman in our family to give up their firstborn daughter to go to finishing school when they were 5 years old. But once it was my turn, I learned what finishing school really meant. Grandma had controlled our family for decades, and the finishing school for firstborn girls was her most treasured tradition. The mothers never saw their daughters again until they turned 18 and returned home strange, quiet, and completely devoted to Grandma. I remember when I was 4 and one of my cousins finally came home. She wouldn't talk about their years away, just said Grandma had taught them well. My aunt cried, overjoyed to see her daughter again, but my cousin just watched Grandma emotionlessly. I was my mother's firstborn daughter, but my mom didn't want to hand me over, so before I turned 5, she tried to run with me. She made it 3 states away before Grandma found us. I don't know what Grandma threatened, but Mom came back defeated. On my 5th birthday, she packed my little suitcase with shaking hands. "I'll see you when you're 18, she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "Be good for Grandma." I screamed for her as Grandma drove me away, but Mom just stood in the driveway, broken. Well, it turned out those 13 years at Grandma's farm weren't school. They were labor camps. She had 12 girls at any time, aged 5 to 18, working her massive farm from dawn to dusk. We weren't learning to be proper women. We were free child labor. We worked the fields, tended animals, cooked, cleaned, and were struck if we slowed down. But that wasn't the worst part. Every night, Grandma would tell us how our mothers had abandoned us, chosen their own comfort over raising us. She'd show us fake letters where our mothers said they were glad we were gone. By the time girls turned 18, they despised the mothers they'd once loved. That's why they returned as strangers. I almost fell for it too. For years, I believed Mom had thrown me away. But when I was 15, I found something that changed everything. Hidden in Grandma's desk were the real letters. Hundreds of them. Letters from mothers begging to see their daughters, promising anything for just one visit. Letters stained with tears, full of love and desperation. Mom had written me every week for 10 years. I started planning that day while I pretended to be the perfect brainwashed granddaughter. When I turned 18 and Grandma finally drove me home, I played my part. I called Mom by her first name, acted cold and distant. I saw her heart break but couldn't risk Grandma suspecting. I had to save the 11 girls still trapped on that farm. For months, I gathered evidence. I took photos during my required visits to Grandma, documenting the young girls working fields in brutal heat. I recorded Grandma's nightly brainwashing sessions. I copied financial records showing she'd been collecting government subsidies for a fake boarding school while using child slaves. When I had enough, I went to Mom and showed her everything. Mom sobbed for hours, holding the letters she'd written me. Together, we went to the police. They raided the farm and found 11 girls, malnourished and exhausted. The youngest, my second cousin, was only 6, already believing her mother had willingly sold her to Grandma. It was heartbreaking watching these girls reunite with mothers they'd been taught to hate. Grandma was arrested, but she'd prepared for this. At her trial, she produced documents signed by every mother, giving her full custody. The mothers swore they'd been forced to sign, but the signatures were real. Grandma's lawyer argued the mothers had willingly given up their daughters and now regretted it, which was sad but evidence of a crime. The case dragged on while Grandma walked free on bail. That's when family members started choosing sides. Half believed Grandma had been saving girls. They testified about how well-behaved the returned daughters were, how successful they'd become. They didn't care that success came from 13 years of unpaid labor and psychological torture. The other half had been in the school themselves and knew the truth but were terrified to speak up. Grandma still had power, still had secrets, still had ways to destroy lives. Mom became the focal point of Grandma's rage. She'd broken the cycle, exposed the system. Grandma's supporters harassed us daily. Dead animals on our doorstep, windows broken, constant threats. We moved 3 times, but they always found us. Mom started drinking and stopped sleeping. She'd saved me but lost everything else, so she attempted to take her own life. I found her in time, but barely. As paramedics worked on her, she grabbed my hand and whispered, "I'm sorry I gave you to her. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stop her sooner." She survived but was committed to a psychiatric ward for her own safety. I testified